The Chinese have about 600 military satellites hovering around the world. They have photographed every square inch of the United States. There are other means by which you can get this stuff. Of course, the United States is the world's greatest, has the world's greatest intelligence capabilities. We spy on the Chinese all the time, using many, many different mechanisms. So there seems something a little bit irrational about suddenly having this kind of paranoid attack about one balloon that we happened to see when we did nothing about ones that had passed through before.
On a scale of 1 to 10 on national security issues, I'll politely, Fareed, give it about a 2. This says a lot more about the inability of Washington and Congress and the White House to talk about relatively insignificant national security issues than it does about intelligence. Look, if the Chinese want to collect photos of America, you can get to Google Earth, you can get a Chinese secret satellite. If they want to intercept communications, they can do it with satellites. I would agree that there are certain advantages a balloon would have. But Fareed, we twisted ourselves around a balloon for days in Washington, D.C., and the Secretary of State canceled a trip for a balloon. Give me a break. This is a 2 on a scale of 1 to 10.
There are a lot of urgent issues that the United States needs to deal with China on. Yeah. You know, as I say, we're in a new world. We're in a world where we have a great power that is not dependent on the U.S. for security like Japan or Germany. Powerful country, economically a competitor. We need to find a way to have an adult relationship with China. We have a long history of when these kind of things happen, intelligence agencies and the government inflate the threat, tell you that there's some kind of vital danger that there wasn't. I mean, you know, this is the same intelligence agencies told us Saddam Hussein had nuclear weapons. So one has to take that with a healthy dose of skepticism, given what I said, the facts, which is everybody who knows anything about this subject says you can get much more and much better images using spy satellites. A powerful economic competitor, a geopolitical competitor, and the United States should try to make sure it remains the most powerful country in the world. The way to do that, by the way, is to invest in America, to invest in American jobs, precisely what the Biden administration is doing, to maintain strong alliances. None of that requires this. And by the way, how come Marco Rubio didn't say anything when these balloons were flying over during the Trump administration? This is just one more indication of how everything, even a balloon, has become a fodder for a kind of crazy partisan warfare in Washington these days.
Inside Biden's decision to take care of the Chinese spy balloon that triggered a diplomatic crisis.
Oh my God, they didn't exactly get on that like a Nord Stream pipeline level.
And then, so when this balloon was flying over the U.S., there was a big freak out, and it led to stories like this. Now look at China's history of spying.
Wait, but because I was trying to look up the balloon because, like I told you, I thought I dreamt it. It was such a dumb. So I looked it up and it was like, why they would use a balloon. They listed all these reasons why it would be advantageous to spy with a balloon. And I was like, did anybody I just want to raise my hand. Do you think maybe a big white balloon might be the most noticeable thing? I mean, I get it's low tech and
maybe we're not supposed to, maybe there's matters of intelligence that us lay people are not allowed to grasp.
Does this history include a car jammed filled with clowns? Is their entire history.
Well, look, Kurt, you're skeptic.
They come at us with those big dragon puppets. All right.
I remember actually when this was happening, Kurt, you texted me and said, "What the hell?"
You were like,
"This is bullshit."
Yeah, that's right. I couldn't find one thing because I saw. The fine print was suspected spy balloon. Was that they all said? Then they all just dropped suspected.
Yes, that's what I was doing.
And so suspected. I'm like, well, that's like free credit report. How that's not I couldn't find one thing saying it was not. So I was like, this has to be.
Well, your skepticism has been vindicated because now, of course, as always happens, whenever there is this explosive claim made about an official enemy like China or Russia or whoever else, there's always the moment when it has to be walked back, when the evidence has to be admitted, when the hype has worn off.
They've examined the payload
of the balloon pilot. Yes, they have. So not only was there this supposed Chinese spy balloon, but also these recent unidentified flying objects that the U.S. shot down over Canada. And now we're getting
balloons.
well, we don't know yet. We don't know. But now we're going to get an update on what these objects and balloons really are about.
Back here in Washington, there is breaking news tonight on that Chinese spy balloon. CBS News has just
Breaking news. It's not a spy balloon.
learned that U.S. intelligence watched the high-flying airship as it lifted off near China's south coast.
You hear that? So U.S. intelligence watched this balloon the moment it left China.
That was my question, because it has to come from mainland China, right?
Yes.
So I mean, I think Jimmy showed all the bases we have surround.
Oh, yeah.
None of our high tech surrounding China bases picked up on this balloon.
No, they absolutely did, and that's what they have to admit now. Is like we were supposed to initially admit that all of a sudden this balloon, this Chinese spy balloon, appeared out of nowhere. Well, guess what? We were tracking it the whole time, and the reason why we're tracking it is because it's not a spy balloon; it's actually a weather tracking balloon, as we're going to get to.
Wait, China told the truth?
And our media lied. Imagine that.
That means the U.S. military had been tracking it for nearly a week before it entered U.S. airspace, longer than originally known.
You don't say.
Wait, is this story going to end with why didn't they act sooner to stop the Chinese spy balloon?
Correct. Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
This is at the White House. So, Nancy, they were watching this from the beginning?
They were, Nora, and what they saw was this balloon heading east from China towards Guam and Hawaii. But then it took a sharp northward turn, a beeline towards Alaska.
And we're going to get to why that was. And it turns out this was just a weather system, some cold air that pushed it that way. This was not a spy balloon trying to, monitor the secrets of the U.S. This was just a weather balloon being pushed by the weather.
Also revealed today that the 3 subsequent objects they shot down probably were not involved in spying.
You don't say. You don't say.
Wait, why are you still writing spy balloon in the thing underneath it then?
The 3 objects shot down this weekend may have been harmless research balloons. That's now a leading theory for the intelligence community.
There
Did they bring up UFOs so that this balloon thing is that embarrassing so that you would associate they're trying to say it was just balloons now?
It's a good question. I mean, this happened at a very opportune time. Also, there was the story about the U.S. blowing up the Nord Stream 2. So it's a good time to start a freak out about some unidentified flying objects and a Chinese spy balloon.
Well, I thought, what's his name? Was it Blinken was supposed to go to China?
He canceled his trip?
Like that. I thought it was to get out of going a trip to China.
So here is from Caitlin Johnstone. U.S. officials now say Chinese spy balloon flew over U.S. accidentally. And Caitlin talks about this headline in the Washington Post. U.S. tracked China spy balloon from launch on Hainan Island along unusual path. But check out the subheading there. It says, the large Chinese surveillance device that flew across Alaska and the continental U.S. may have been diverted on an errant path caused by atypical weather conditions.
Was there a rudder on the balloon? Because if there wasn't, I'd say probably that's how it happened.
But notice how the headline's still calling it a spy balloon. So the headline is spy balloon, but then in the subheading, they actually watered it down to surveillance device because that surveillance device was really just tracking weather.
Well, they're spying on our weather.
And here it is from this Washington Post article. According to several U.S. officials who said analysts are now examining the possibility that China didn't intend to penetrate the American heartland with their airborne surveillance device.
Oh.
The balloon floated over Alaska's Aleutian Islands, thousands of miles away from Guam, then drifted over Canada, where it encountered strong winds that appear to have pushed the balloon south into the continental United States.
My God, could it be possible?
And there it is.
We
right
must
there.
examine the possibility.
There's the weather system. This is basically why we had a Chinese spy balloon freak out.
So you're saying they control the weather?
Here's Caitlin Johnson again. Washington Post. It was a spy balloon. It was a spy balloon. It's definitely 100% a Chinese spy balloon. Okay. It had no intention of flying over America to spy on us, but it was definitely 100% a spy balloon. She also says, so it's entirely possible that the American political media class has been spending the month of February furiously demanding more militarism and more Cold War escalations over 4 harmless balloons. Sometimes I think U.S. media should abandon its whole free speech, free press charade and just switch to publishing news straight out of the Pentagon. And again, so after the Chinese balloon came these unidentified objects that were shot down. And check out the headline there. 3 objects shot down after Chinese spy balloon. Of course, not a spy balloon. May be benign, White House says. And here is White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre speaking on MSNBC.
Why is the American military shooting something out of the sky over Canada?
Because it's part of NORAD. The NORAD is part of like it's a what you call a coalition, a consortium. And so
because we got to shoot something down, we just got to just knock something, and they happen to be over Canada, so
we can't take a chance on another balloon. It was a little embarrassing because they don't want to not warmonger with China, but they also, so the Democrats were like, no, we knew it was a spy balloon. We were watching it. We can't just shoot down a spy balloon. They couldn't say it's just not a spy balloon.
Exactly.
a pact, okay. Exactly, and so that's why we were able to do that. Again, we didn't do it on our own. We did it clearly in step with Canada.
Canada helped us shoot down.
I say Canada all the time.
Fair enough. And by the way, these missiles that were used to shoot down these objects over Canada are pretty expensive. But guess what? The military missed the unidentified flying object with its first missile shot over Lake Huron.
Wait a minute. The UFO, are they also still calling UFO?
Unidentified. And the point is we tried to shoot them down, but we missed the first time. Mike Tracy says, so because of some weird political frenzy over alleged spy balloons, the U.S. military just fired a $400,000 Sidewinder missile. Sidewinder that hit nothing and splashed right into Lake Huron. Makes sense.
I mean, it sounds like a bargain if you look at how they spend.
Here's more from Bloomberg. U.S. says 3 mystery objects, likely private, with no China link. Until initial evidence finds no link to Chinese espionage efforts. But guess what? We might not know this because the debris has not been located, according to the Pentagon. This is Max Blumenthal. Biden directed the military to shoot down several objects over U.S. skies, but may never be able to tell the public what those objects are and may not know himself. Now his administration is trying to tamp down on burgeoning conspiracies because why would the public have questions? And what they're saying here is from one official, if it can't be recovered, it's going to be extremely difficult to say with great certainty what these things were.
It sounds like they're trying to cause conspiracies, is what it sounds like.
Absolutely. And they're doing a great job, but not after they also stoked a new round of Cold War panic and frenzy by accusing China of launching a spy balloon over the U.S. when it turns out this is a weather balloon pushed by a weather system.
I did suspect. Does anyone use a spy balloon? I've never heard of that ever. Maybe World War I, they did some spy ballooning. Yeah.
Did the inventor of the balloon think of his invention as being used for spying?
Phineas Balloon? I don't know.
Phineas. I just want to remind everybody, this is the American military bases surrounding China. Are there any Chinese military bases surrounding the United States? I don't think so. Just so you know, that's what's going on. So this guy, Arnaud Bertrand, did a thread, and I found this very interesting. I wanted to share it with you because you don't get this perspective in the corporate media. That's the show we do here. We give you the alternative news source. We don't bring on main. So it says he says first the United States story. China sent a spy balloon over highly strategic U.S. sites. It chose to spy on these sites with a big visible balloon. Reported as being as big as multiple school buses that anyone can see with the naked eye, even from the ground. And they did that to demonstrate its capability. That was what the United States said. Despite having a plethora of other more discreet ways to spy, like satellites or stealth drones, because that balloon couldn't do anything that their satellites already can do.
Or how about being directly linked to all of our major businesses, completely enmeshed with us, and you can get your hands on whatever you want, whenever you want.
So unclear that anyone doubted China had mastered the technology of hot air balloons. and why it therefore needed to demonstrate this capability. Because that's what they said. That was China demonstrating they had the capability to do this.
I would be so. I mean, this has to be the biggest insult. If I was China,
I agree.
I'm like, we invented gunpowder and written language, you motherfucker. Like,
China chose to do so. This is the United States. This is the United States story. Their version is that China chose to do this with the balloon on the eve of Secretary of State Antony Blinken's visit to China, where he was invited, and hours after signaling Blinken would also be meeting with Xi Jinping during his visit, a high-level meeting not granted to any U.S. Secretary of States in years. So they're saying, look, this is the United States version of the story. They did that even though they had this meeting set up.
Sounds like they didn't want to go to a meeting. Is what
sounds like it. The story, therefore, being that China chose to disrupt a meeting with its own president and to sabotage its own efforts at détente in the U.S.-China conflict. The Pentagon said it had been tracking the balloon for quite some time and that it wasn't the first time such an incident occurred. But this time, for unclear reasons, it chose to do a public announcement. I think we know what that public announcement was for. So this stuff has happened before. They said that wasn't even a Chinese government balloon. It was a private weather kind of a thing. And so this has happened before, they're admitting. And so why make a thing out of it now? Why? Because we can scare the shit out of the American people that somehow China is going to come and blow us up. So now we can spend a couple of $100 more billion on ramping. We just built 3 or 4 new military bases in the Philippines. This is all about the military industrial complex lining their pockets and draining your treasury while people live under every bridge in this country. You go bankrupt when you get sick, and half the country can't afford a $500 emergency. So as a result of this, Blinken then announced he's postponing his China trip over something that they admit happened before and no one cared about. Now the story from the Chinese side. To them, this is a fluke accident, the balloon being a civilian airship used for research, mainly meteorological purposes, that deviated far from its planned course because of a strong westerlies. Apparently, there's winds that flow from west to east, and it took it around. Limited self-steering capability, the main characteristic of a balloon being, of course, that it can only go up and down. A piece in the Washington Post seems to confirm this, quoting experts in national security and aerospace who said the craft appears to share characteristics with high-altitude balloons used by developed countries around the world for weather forecasting. So the experts, even at the Washington Post, said, yeah, it's a weather balloon. And everybody uses these. And this got caught in some kind of...
The Pentagon says it posed no serious physical or intelligence threat.
And the Pentagon also said that it posed no serious physical or intelligence threat.
Oh, so this came out as... Because I told you I was on the road, and I thought I dreamt it, because I heard about a balloon from China, Chinese spy balloon. And then I looked up it, and then I saw suspected. That's the little qualifier. Suspected. And I was like, I suspect it's probably not that.
Yes. So even the Pentagon says they're not getting anything. The Pentagon itself said the payload wouldn't offer much in the way of surveillance that China couldn't collect through spy satellites, and that the balloon posed no serious physical or intelligence threat. I.e., the Pentagon themselves said it would make 0 sense for China to use a balloon like this for intelligence purposes. Kind of begs the question then why they decided to make a big deal out of it in the first place. So they could ramp up the war machine, of course.
Yeah, this is a funny one because this is where you see the Republicans. I've been waiting for them to really jump on something classic Republican stupid. Like, why hasn't he shot it down yet?
Yes, they're making Biden look weak.
Yes. And then what's gross is on the Democrat side, what they should have said was, well, it's probably not a spy balloon, idiot. But they can't queer the deal for their future war in 2025.
That's
we've been
right.
reading about. So we got to say it's a suspected spy balloon at the very least, but we just didn't know why we couldn't shoot it.
But we don't know. I'll let you decide for yourself which story makes more sense. The sheer ridiculousness of the nth Red Scare episode is as obvious to anyone with an iota of common sense, except, sadly, common sense seems to be in critical short supply these days.
I read a thing and I was trying to find anybody saying, like,
this?
Probably not a spy balloon. Yeah.
Hard to find, right?
I couldn't find it. I had to text Aaron. He sent me something, some random.
Really?
Yeah, and then I'm reading it. I was like, CNN has an article addressing, like, well, why send a balloon? It's a whole paragraph about why it's like, well, it's a low tech, it's an easy something. They have all these reasons why. And I'm sitting there reading this, and I'm like, okay, well, here's just one thing I would throw into while you're mulling over whether to use a balloon. It's a big white balloon that everyone's going to see.
With the naked eye. With the naked eye, you can see it.
I guess it sounds perfect, like the perfect crime, except for this one thing.
Also, as often, the real story is probably why this story became a story in the first place. And the important context here is, of course, Blinken's visit to China, which could, one can always dream, have been a step towards some form of de-escalation in China and U.S. rapport. It was quite easily foreseeable that a story like this one on the eve of the trip would have made it politically very difficult for Blinken to go. So a plausible hypothesis is that this whole episode is an attempt by internal U.S. forces to prevent any U.S.-China détente.
You know what they're trying to do? I think it's like an Indiana Jones where he's got the bag of sand. He's trying to replace it to take the monkey out. So as Ukraine becomes more and more of a drawn-out thing that regular people notice.
Just like Afghanistan.
You got to slip in. Yeah, you got to slip in China to replace the Ukraine thing. Yeah,
100%. That, like when people were bending over backwards to give Joe Biden credit for pulling out of Afghanistan, I said, he's not going to stop spending the money that we were spending in Afghanistan. Right. They're just going to go spend it somewhere else. And that's why they're allowing him to pull out of this 20-year war, because it's starting to look bad.
Yeah.
So we can't keep spending all this money. We got to go spend it somewhere else. So they immediately invent Ukraine. They knew they had Ukraine in the chamber waiting to go. And then they knew China was going to happen too. So that's why so anybody who told you that they give Joe Biden props or credit for pulling out of Afghanistan is wrong. I'll just put it that way. I don't have need to insult them.
CIA psychopath going around on podcasts is saying Ukraine's just our practice. We
that's
can
right.
have them test our weapons when we have our war with China.
So it'd be immensely risky for anyone in China to do something like this, as it'd undoubtedly be seen as an act of high treason with grave consequences for themselves. Also, again, balloons like this particular one basically can't be steered. So how did they even know where the F it was going to go?
Well, we just got to get a little bit extra that our satellites couldn't get. We make up the difference in balloons. To plan sending a balloon like this from China to a place over U.S. land isn't even doable in the first place. The last hypothesis, which I guess is also somewhat likely, is that this is a series of unfortunate events without any malice on either side. Balloon deviates from course, gets in U.S. airspace, people see it, and Pentagon feels it has to communicate about it. The media, wearing their usual China bad hat, decide to go all in on scaremongering, and political opposition and China hawks jump on the bandwagon. Administration feels it has no other choice than to cancel the trip and doesn't have the political courage to say, this is just a balloon that drifted off course. Well, I guess in this scenario, there is, in fact, malice on the media's part, and that of politicians and wider members of the blob, but it's organic malice, so to speak, jumping at a golden opportunity to scaremonger. Conclusion, however you see it, this story is absolutely shameful and a sad reflection of the insane times we live in, when rather than take the time to carefully consider facts, apply reason and common sense, we instead choose as a society to incite fear and hostility. That got really ramped up when Donald Trump became president, and anything that would scare you about Russia got repeated immediately, and nobody fact-checked anything, and they had to fire people almost on the weekly over at CNN and ABC News for launching false Russiagate stories. Is it blow your mind when you think of how much the same media was like, you're racist to say the virus leaked in China?
Mm-hmm.
And then they're the first ones to say they're attacking us with balloons?
Isn't that something? That's right.
That's a crazy conspiracy that the virus lab in Wuhan might have had something to do with
racist.
Wuhan. But not that a weather balloon is spy. I mean, unbelievable. And the amount of people doing the question is unbelievable.
It's unbelievable to see the American public fall for this, but they have people like Rachel Maddow telling them this, and people know that. And nerds also don't lie. That's why they have Chris Hayes, because nerds wouldn't lie. Of course they do.
People.
Chris Hayes actually told the truth about Ukraine a little bit.
Yeah.
He said, "Hey, maybe we should stop sending them arms."
So they got in trouble again.
So they
he gets in trouble every time.
So they forced a negotiation, and people called him the worst. His own audience.
He don't have the balls of Rachel Maddow.
He doesn't have the balls.
And again, there's no understanding. If you look at this balloon business, if I could just stop for a second. We sent an F-22, the most expensive aircraft ever built, out to shoot down a balloon. And the Chinese had told us, well, it's a weather balloon. But of course, you never believe anything the Chinese say, because the Chinese are now enemies and they always lie. But let's look at the facts. The Chinese have 300 satellites, 300 in space. Of that number, almost a third have military application. The Chinese have their own global positioning system, just like the Russians, just as we do. They have the same capability to monitor what happens from 100,000 feet in space that we do. They can read the names on gravestones, and if they want to monitor the conversations in the White House, they can do it. All right? Why are we worried about this flimsy balloon that is too small to carry a significant payload? It can't even communicate with China. It's on the wrong side of the world. The only way it could communicate is to send data to satellites. Meanwhile, our border is open. This is all nonsense, what we're hearing about the stupid balloon. They're missing the point. Washington needs to be held accountable for its incalculable negligence and mendacity. I agree with that. But you're not going to get anything out of the balloon. You need to turn to the really substantive issues. Why are our borders open? Why do we have 100,000 troops in Europe, including almost 50,000 in Poland, and none on our borders? There's no threat to Europe from Russia. Russia is not interested in invading Europe. This is all nonsense. This was cooked up for years to try and demonize Putin and turn him again into another Hitler figure. It's the same people doing these things over and over and over again. At some point, the American people need to become engaged and put an end to it. That's the easiest way I can put it.
Do you think this spy balloon is to then embarrass President Biden right before the State of the Union? Or because, they start saying, oh, well, they came in with Trump, but now we can't prove it. And national intelligence didn't ever communicate this to that president. Is this just a giant distraction for the American people, so they don't actually look at what's happening within our own borders or at our border?
Well, I think so. Undoubtedly, you have the usual suspects on the right who will grasp at anything to attack Biden. But the truth is that if you want to go after Biden, you've got lots of reasons to do it that have nothing to do with the weather balloon. But for some reason, a lot of people on the Hill, I don't think they understand what you and I just discussed. They don't understand the Chinese satellite array. They don't understand that the Chinese from space can track every surface combatant in the United States Navy 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And any U.S. surface warship that comes within 200 nautical miles, that location data can be turned into targeting data that results instantly in the launch of missiles to sink it. Now, that's serious. That's a real threat. It doesn't necessarily mean we have to go to war, but it's something we should be aware of. Listening to congressmen and senators talk, you'd think they knew absolutely nothing about the true state of affairs. We can't recruit for our armed forces. People say the volunteer force is imploding. I think there's a lot of evidence for that. Has anybody raised that with Biden? And today, I think it's the CEO of Bank of America is worried about default. And you have Janice Yellen running around as the Secretary of the Treasury saying, well, we could default. We must not default. We've never defaulted. Well, first of all, we have defaulted. We defaulted in 32 and 34. We just called it restructuring the debt. We defaulted in 1971 when we went off the gold standard because we could not cope with the enormous debt being amassed as a result of Lyndon Johnson's war on poverty and the war in Vietnam. So we've been down this road before. Nobody wants to admit those things. So we run around and say, we have to pay our debts. We have to pay our debts. We have to pay our debts. You've got CEOs now saying, how are we going to do that? How is it possible? Nobody's telling the truth about the bond market. You've got to look at everything, the holistic picture. And what about all the jobs and the industries that have been shipped overseas? Have they come back? Is there any effort to bring them back? What are we doing? Americans need to wake up. Forget the balloon.